My favorite RPG book I own is this little pocket edition copy of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition core rulebook. I remember buying it in a random game shop downtown. I remember reading through it and just loving every bit of it. The art, the writing, and the rules. It flooded my mind with stories, endless stories of heroism and fate. It made me feel so excited to run my first game. I picked up my first copy of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition core rulebook back in 2021. While this doesn't make me an original fan, I still feel that way. There's been a lot of change since then with Pathfinder and the RPG space in general. Back then, we were worried about the illusion of choice video and trying to get our D&D only friends to play it. There was and is a lot to love about Pathfinder back then, especially when compared to D&D. I felt the community was largely positive and helpful. While I don't frequent those community spaces as much as I used to, they were very helpful for someone who had never run D&D or Pathfinder to get a handle on what the game expected of me and my players. It was really a great time. We're 5 years from that time. There's a whole host of new books since then, a litany of discussions have been had, and a whole remaster of the game. I've been playing it non-stop since then, which is probably why I'm starting to look elsewhere for my weekend fix of dice rolling. You see, I'm getting a little tired of Pathfinder in some ways. And not for the ways I think most people thought I would get tired of it. That's a complicated journey though, and one that should probably start with how I got into Pathfinder 2e. I started playing D&D right before the pandemic hit in early 2020. We played 5th edition D&D and walked through the now iconic Lost Mines of Phandelver story and continued to Storm King's Thunder. That campaign ultimately wrapped with homebrew content at level 17. At a time where I was navigating what I thought of myself, I found that this game kept me connected with other people and let me express myself and my ideas, which was important during the pandemic. During that first campaign, we were in the midst of the release of Cyberpunk 2077, and there was some buzz around the franchise. I learned from this Brian David Gilbert video that it was attached to this RPG that sounded like fun. That's right, a few months into my first D&D campaign, I started to learn Cyberpunk 2020. I even ran a one-shot for it sometime in 2020, thanks to the encouragement of my younger brother. Yet my heart yearned for something fantastical, something that was like D&D but had a more interesting combat system. I moved on to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Let's get into why that is. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, even for someone who is inexperienced with RPGs, had an interesting set of changes from D&D. One of the biggest was character customization. Pathfinder characters have so much going on that I can see some people getting intimidated by it. But for me, it was just so freeing. Each ancestry, class, and skill had their own set of customizable feats. This would make it so that two fighters, although they get the same class chassis, can end up being wildly different based on the feats they pick. This was way more customization than 5th edition ended up having. Compare the barbarian classes in both games for the best comparison of customization. 5e's barbarian, outside of ability score improvements and other choices that all classes make, can make up to 4 choices during the course of their run. They can choose their subclass, and if they happen to choose Totem Warrior, they choose a totem at 3rd, 6th, and 14th level. Conversely, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, barbarians make about 12 choices in their whole run. This doesn't include skill feats, general feats, attribute boosts, or skill increases, and many other choices that other classes make. Literally, the Pathfinder 2e Barbarian makes 3 times as many choices as the 5e Barbarian. This level of increased customization gave me the feeling that I could play whatever I wanted to in this game. This also doesn't go into archetypes, which allow you to develop your character in more interesting ways. Now, I'm using 5e as a point of comparison here, but only because it's most people's frame of reference when discovering PF2e. Pathfinder's myriad of choices each class makes can be intimidating for some. 5e's more relaxed relationship with class choices will absolutely feel less overwhelming than Pathfinder's. But I think if you can proficiently navigate your average 5e spellcaster, you can navigate any of Pathfinder's classes fairly easily. Once you get the hang of it, there's so much more you can do with each character individually to fulfill whatever fantasy you have in mind. Given some of the heavy customization of characters, it's also worth talking about the heavy customizability of weapons. A big draw to the game was the ability for characters to build their own magic weapons using the rune system. Later on, this system would be criticized for some of its missteps, but I still think making your own magic weapons feels great. How it works is that magical weapons can have these things called property runes. You can have a number of property runes equal to the attack roll bonus on a weapon. 1 if it's a +1, 2 if it's a +2, and so on. These runes make it so your weapon can make an enemy scared, burn an enemy, hurt fiends more, give the weapon more reach, allow the weapon to change shape, and more. When I was first getting into the game, I really liked this idea of giving your magic weapons some more oomph and customizability. It helped to resolve a problem I had with D&D, and that making your own magic items is this strange dance you have to do with your GM. In Pathfinder, it's as easy as finding, crafting, or purchasing the right rune. There's just this wonder to building something that shores up a weakness of your build or improves one of your strengths. It's also just a good experience to see the options that are available to you and work toward them. There's also the aspect of magic weapons, where the game is actually built around the assumption that you're going to be getting them to improve your character. That brings me to my next point, that the game itself is pretty balanced compared to D&D. Even small things, like Wall of Force having HP that a strong character can eventually push through, or the way that level is added to your skill, constantly making you stronger than enemies that used to give you trouble while preparing you for the next big fight. The game does a really good job of not having a single dominant strategy or set of options. There are a few options which may seem out of band or stronger than others, but these are rare when contrasted with D&D and earlier editions of Pathfinder, which have lots of options which are just bad, and loads of options that are just no-brainers. Pathfinder 2nd Edition does this balance well, while not cutting down on its options and customizability. That balance is, of course, also helped by the 3-action economy. When I first ran the game, I thought this would open up a lot more possibilities for the game. In reality, it provides a more tactical experience where you're trying to decide how to best accomplish what you want on your turn, given the restrictions that the action economy provides. While it garners criticism, having movement be a considered action on equal footing with attacking really elevates the game for me. It's such a more interesting tactical space when you can trade out some of your mundane actions to do something more interesting and powerful. While sometimes turns can look the same as D&D, especially at lower levels, I end up being far more considerate of my abilities in the action economy in Pathfinder. Recently, I've been playing a champion, and I'm constantly thinking of how I want to use my abilities to best help myself and my team, which requires thinking about how I want to use my actions and how those actions should be prioritized. The 3-action economy is such a wonderful addition to the system because of these considerations. The greatest part about all of this is that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is still in the same family as D&D 5th Edition, 3rd Edition, and Pathfinder 1st Edition. There's still skill checks, armor class, saving throws, attributes, and a bunch of other stuff that works in a familiar way to older editions of the game. This is a great boon for teaching people how the game works. It's so similar to D&D that it's easy to just teach what is different, even if it is a lot. It's what makes me think that it's one of the best forks of 3rd Edition ever published. Much better balance, character customization, and abilities than any other version of the game released before or since. It makes it feel comfortable, yet I also think that's its downfall. While I've explored lots of games on my own time, I've only ran a handful because of some of the time constraints in my life. I did learn a lot running through games like Lancer, Root, Cyberpunk, Mouse Ritter, and Fabula Ultima. There's a lot to love about each and every one of those games. Many of them are fantastic evolutions of existing systems, with Fabula Ultima being entirely unique and fun in its own way. Yet one of the things that really brought me into those systems was the feeling that they were not worried about appealing to people who really like D&D. Even Lancer, despite its influence of 4th edition, feels like something entirely different than D&D or Pathfinder. These differences make me look at Pathfinder 2e in a different light. It made me dislike some of the things that PF2e held on to from earlier editions. Chief among these is money. Money in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is really well thought out. You have these nice tables which discuss how much you should be giving to your players in terms of money and item power. This chart is based on what the writers of the game were expecting you to get at these levels. It's super helpful for running a game and understanding where their players should be in terms of money. Yet, I find it almost completely superfluous. Permanent magic items in Pathfinder are a soft progression requirement. That means the game expects players to get bonuses to their armor and weapons at specific levels in the game. The GM should be providing you with opportunities to get these kinds of items so that you can keep up with the monsters of the game. Similarly, there are other ways of gating progression. Settlements have levels to specifically restrict the number of items they can sell. Items also have levels to suggest their level of power. This makes something like money feel useless. If the PCs are expected to get certain items at certain levels anyway, and the gold economy is built around it, then the money in the game only serves to gatekeep that content, despite there being other ways to gatekeep that progression, like levels. Tracking money then feels like busy work for both the GM and the players. Tangentially related, but if we're making it a soft requirement for players to have more potent items, why not just make that part of the leveling structure? Sure, this is a classic RPG trope of finding a +1 magic sword in the depths of the dungeon, but when you think about it from a gameplay perspective, if the +1 sword is expected, then is it really an upgrade? There's definitely an argument here about power that feels real versus power that is real, but I think this is something that could largely be removed from the game, and it wouldn't affect anything about how the game is played, except for making powerful weapons far less frequent, as players and game masters would only see them if they had specific properties that truly made them different or more powerful than other magic weapons. Now, to be fair to Pathfinder, they have a rule for automatic bonus progression to get rid of a lot of the item bonuses in the game to accommodate freaks like me who think that the bonuses should come from levels rather than items you manage to pick up. That said, it still feels weird to pretend like these items are special and magical when they are practically expected from the GM and the players. Item progression in Pathfinder is so finely tuned that it makes those items feel less special as a result. Given some of the previous conversation, you think that spellcasters would have an easier time in the game. While they don't have to upgrade weapons as often, it's still useful to get new scrolls and wands to shore up their resources. Although that leads me to my next point that I'm just not in love with the casting system in Pathfinder or D&D. Maybe it's me, but I think these sorts of systems tend to breed a whole ton of problems. Due to the spellcaster being a high variety character who chooses from a staggering list of spells, there's just a high chance of picking something wrong and having a wasted slot. Pathfinder and D&D have methods of mitigating this feeling with wands, staves, and scrolls, but ultimately, losing and misusing spell slots can feel awful from a player perspective most of the time. Given the opportunity, I'd probably give spellcasters a small set of cantrips which auto-scale for the rest of the game. They can then pick up feats if they want more specialized spells that do things that are more specific. Even then, I can think of some problems with this method of spellcasting from a feelings perspective. There's also some fixes that work with Vancian casters, like essence casting from the Magic Plus third-party supplement. I'm also very aware of the people who really enjoy the Vancian casting from Pathfinder 2e. There's probably room for both, especially given classes like the Kineticist, which work a lot like how I suggested. I personally feel like spellcasting should be reworked entirely, just to get rid of a ton of baggage from earlier editions of the game. One of the reasons I can see people really liking Vancian casting is that its rules reflect what being a smart wizard is like. You have to pick your spells ahead of time, which means you have to focus on what the day could bring and how to best prepare for it, looking for ways to learn more about the enemy you're about to fight. It's pretty cool in that way. In fact, I think it would be really cool if there were some ways of incentivizing this kind of play through the use of narrative experience for the classes. Unfortunately, Pathfinder 2nd Edition has few narrative mechanics to work with. In Pathfinder, the only incentives provided by the book are killing monsters and resolving skill challenges. While this isn't a problem for the game that Pathfinder is trying to be, I wish there was more to work with as a GM. Sure, there's some ways you can encourage roleplaying with a hero point here or some extra XP there. Yet, because of the game's roots in D&D along with its adherence to balance, any method of giving specific characters individual XP triggers for acting in their class or character is something that disturbs both the game balance and takes the focus away from things that the game is trying to do. It's not impossible, and I have an idea of how to fix it, although that's probably best left to another video, but these games are ultimately monster fighters, and there's very little else in the game to encourage the players to live out their characters completely. Now, given all the complaining I've been doing and the title of this video, I'm sure you're curious as to what's next for me. Before we talk about that though, let's summarize some of the things I want from the next game I want to run. I'd like it to still be fantasy because I love fantasy. I'd still like it to have a tactical combat system, but with some cool incentives for being your character. I'd also love a lot of character customization to make each hero feel different from one another. I'd also like it to shy away from worrying about resources like money and have numerical progress baked into the character's levels. Given all of these, we should be ready to... Let's talk about playing something else for a bit, huh? This is the part of the video where we're going to make some game recommendations and talk about some cool things about each. First, I'm going to talk about some games which place a greater focus on narrative rather than combat, starting with the Wildsea, which I like a lot. Its setting is very strong, it has cool ancestries you can be part of, and the game is ultimately hopeful about its themes and messaging. I would love to play some Wildsea at some point, but it being a narrative game, along with some of its systems not really exciting me all that much, get it lumped here with some of the other games. Another narrative-focused game I think would be interesting to play is Avatar Legends. I love the Avatar universe and characters, so this feels like a great fit for me. It's also something with a bit more going on for its combat system compared to other PBTA games, which is awesome. You also got plenty of Bender and non-Bender playbooks to mess around with. I have the physical and digital versions available to me since I was a backer on the original project, so there's basically nothing stopping me from giving this game a try since it's so available to me. Unfortunately, I don't think a PBTA game really works for a long-term game. I tend to like a long-running game and run that beside shorter, more focused games. While Avatar Legends seems fun for 6 months, there's probably just not enough customization in these playbooks to keep me playing for a very long time. Next up, we definitely have the prettiest book on this list with Eat the Reich. You play as vampires to kill Nazis. This is explicitly a game that doesn't have any long-term play meant for it, but it is something I wanted to shout out alongside Heart, as I believe both games have similar dice pool systems, and Heart has its beat system, which I may end up taking from someday if I ever write my own RPG. Making it so you can unlock abilities based on narrative beats you fulfill is a really great way to motivate your players to roleplay their characters. Ultimately, both of these games look fun, but are really meant for short games, which I'm significantly less interested in running. Alright, we got some of the narrative games out of the way, let's talk about the real heavy hitters, starting with D&D 4th edition. 4E has a bit of a reputation in the community for being the bad one, but as I continue to explore my own tastes and interests, I start to think that 4E has some really good ideas. I like how it has a focus on combat and still has spellcasters be versatile and interesting without requiring any Vancian casting. I also like how it does away with some of the simulationist elements of the game. Things like movement and measurement are abstracted away to be something way simpler. There's also the monster design work, which I feel does a great job of making building and running monsters very fun and easy. 4E isn't without its faults though. There's still a lack of narrative mechanics. The most 4E does with its non-combat systems is skill challenges, which aren't too exciting. It also still holds on to some of the item-based vertical progression that I had been talking about earlier, including the tracking of gold to make sure you're on track with where you should be based on your level. It's the same kind of work as Pathfinder 2E. I'm also unsure with how balanced it is compared to Pathfinder. Overall, I think 4E would work some of the time, but it's still got a lot of the same problems Pathfinder has. One of the newer games to pique my interest is Draw Steel. Draw Steel is great. I love a lot of the same things about it that I mentioned about 4th edition. I think using monsters and building encounters is fun. The casters not having to worry about Vancian magic is a great boon to them. There's an abstraction of parts that used to be heavily detailed, which helps with focusing on the core parts of your build, and each class has really exciting abilities. On top of all of that, it doesn't have any focus on magic items or an economy to keep track of. It's focused on providing a specific kind of heroic fantasy that can feel really fun. I also love that it doesn't include a null result. The parties are always racing towards a conclusion, which feels really great after years of people complaining after missing on an attack roll or having an enemy succeed a save. While I thought there weren't a ton of narrative options beforehand, the complications from the book actually provide a cool set of mechanics that tie into some of the characters' narrative conceits. Draw Steel is a great option, and I hope to play it more. It's not quite the answer I had in mind when initially planning this video, but it really does fill out a ton of my wishlist while still being relatively easy to understand and play. It's the best released version of these 4th edition forks. Speaking of forks, Lancer is another game I really like, although not as much as Draw Steel and Pathfinder 2E. Currently, I think that Lancer's biggest issue for me is purely that I don't particularly care about its setting and characters. I was never a fan of mecha growing up, and I've always preferred fantasy to sci-fi. Yet, Lancer is legitimately so good, it makes me forget that sometimes. A metric ton of customization for your mech, allowing you to build wide or tall within your niche. You also have a ton of freedom for how you want your mech to play out between missions as you switch things out and the other players focus on different parts of their own kit. It's really a great system for combat, and the narrative system in the Kraken Trade Barony supplement can help shore up some of the shortcomings of the narrative parts of the system. It's a fun system, although the balance isn't quite as tight as Pathfinder 2E, and its setting isn't to my personal taste. Before we talk about the last game, I think it's important to mention that I can do a lot of work to get Pathfinder 2E to a point where I like it a lot more. Something like essence casting for Magic Plus, automatic bonus progression, and taking narrative mechanics from other games are easy ways to make the game more my speed. That said, I think it's important to also recognize that these options are atypical of how Paizo was expecting people to play. I would much rather get a cure than just a treatment, and to me, homebrew is a treatment, not a cure. That said, despite all the framing of this video, I actually still like Pathfinder 2E. It's really fun, and I still think it's my preferred game, even compared to some of the newer games I mentioned. If you've just been playing D&D and have ever wanted to take a step outside your comfort zone, try Pathfinder. The game has similar levels of community support, all the rules are available for free, the game is very similar to 5e, and it's just a lot of fun to read and learn new games. Pathfinder 2e is my favorite for a reason. Yet, I think there might be a game that finally dethrones it. It's still in playtest, but Tom Bloom's Icon looks to be the perfect game for me. Has a ton of great features from other games that I mentioned, along with a really tight combat system. It's currently in early playtest for the next version of the game, with the full game likely coming out after Tom finishes his webcomic, Kill 6 Billion Demons. The game has a great vibe and focuses on all the things I love about RPGs. Lots of fun character options, clear focus on its goals, and it even has some narrative mechanics that I really like, even if they may not make it to the final game. There's a clear gameplay loop that it focuses on, and I really love the dice system it's looking to use. Tom's games are super clear about what they are, and Icon looks to be a heroic fantasy game that focuses hard on providing a fun and approachable tactical combat system. I've only played a little bit of the game back in 1.5, but I'm super excited for the next version, which Tom says should enter playtest sometime early next year. If Icon continues to develop in this direction, I'm sure I'll have a different answer for what my favorite RPG is. You'll also very likely see a full breakdown of it when the next playtest drops. My journey with Pathfinder 2e has been enlightening, and led me down to trying a ton of different games. I hope this channel continues to be one that advocates for all different types of games, but I want to highlight the one that's probably going to be the most important in my journey for some time. I've never regretted supporting Paizo or buying Pathfinder, but I'm also excited to continue to explore this fun medium. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support me, you can do so at my Patreon or by downloading my Pay What You Want starter Lancer adventure. The past 6 months have been crazy for my life, and this channel has really taken off since then. This sort of ends what I imagine would be season 1 for the channel. All the videos I made this year feel as though they've culminated into this one, where we talk about the pros and cons of my favorite TTRPG. I hope to continue being a positive voice in the TTRPG space. Thanks again, and happy holidays!